So I just saw Ne Zha 2, and goddamn, bruh. Now, if you've never heard of this movie before, it is currently the 8th highest grossing movie of all time as of this recording. This is an animated action film from China that has undoubtedly proven itself to be a huge cultural phenomenon. It's being reported that auditoriums in China are being regularly sold out for this film, including for late night screenings. The worldwide box office gross, again as of this recording, is reported to be around $1.92 billion. It's the highest grossing animated film of all time, beating Inside Out 2, and the highest grossing non-English language film of all time. So I guess the question I had upon seeing this movie's success was, first, why is it a big success? And second, is the hype warranted? In the US, the film is raking in a decent amount, having grossed $7 million on its opening weekend and $3 million on its second weekend. Not the greatest here in the States, but again, given its gross in China, that doesn't really matter. I imagine this will have the same effect here that RRR did.
RRR! RRR!
Originally, that was a Telugu language film that had a small following, but eventually word of mouth spread and is now regularly regarded as one of the best movies of the decade. Although there are a few reviewers out there who are spreading the good word about Ne Zha 2, shout out to Austin Burke and Saberspark among others for covering this, I have yet to see more reviews pop off for this. It only has 7.2 thousand logs on Letterboxd, which is nothing, so today I want to tell you all about Ne Zha 2. What is this movie, why does it work, and why you should absolutely be seeing it right away. It comes to us from director Yang Yu and is the follow-up to the 2019 film Ne Zha, which is a loose adaptation of the 16th century novel Investiture of the Gods. The first film tells the story of a young boy named Ne Zha, born out of a demon orb and with incredible abilities. He's seen as an outcast due to his demonic ways, and he must find a way to prove himself while also building alliances that will help protect his family and his village. So that's the most bare bones way I can describe the plot of this first movie, because it is admittedly very dense. I didn't even get into the spirit orb, which Ne Zha was supposed to be born out of, and then it got mixed up through a series of circumstances, and so he was born out of the demon orb instead, or the dragons that wish to ascend onto Earth and achieve immortality. There's also another character, Ao Bing, born out of the spirit pearl, who competes with Ne Zha until they learn to work together. The amount of lore presented in this universe is on par with something you'd see in like Lord of the Rings, Dune, or Star Wars. Just imagine if Pixar made a Lord of the Rings film and you'd get a movie like Ne Zha. I enjoyed the first film quite a bit, but a lot of the issues arise from the film's very fast pacing, which makes this sometimes a little hard to follow. I also acknowledge that I'm not familiar with Chinese culture or cinema, so a lot of the sensibilities this movie offers took some getting used to. It very much reminded me of the first time I dove into Indian cinema and saw how they could take a big blockbuster and add many musical numbers to it. This was similar in that the art style and juvenile sense of humor would lead the average American viewer to believe that this is a kid's film, but when you consider the amount of violence and story on screen, it's hard to imagine many kids in the States getting into this. It's definitely a fascinating watch, but I admit that the total differences definitely took some getting used to. Upon finishing the first one, I was curious to see what direction the story would go in and how it would ultimately stand out as an exceptional sequel. Having now seen it, man, this was good. Ne Zha 2 is on a whole new level. Before we proceed, if you're curious as to whether or not you should watch the original, I would say probably. As we'll discuss in a moment, this film starts off right where the first left off, so I honestly would recommend it. I guess spoilers for Ne Zha 1, but again, the second film just picks up like right where the first one ended, so there's your warning, I guess, for that. So at the end of the first one, Ne Zha and Ao Bing defend the village of Chengtang Pass, which results in the destruction of their physical bodies. Tai Yi, the master of Ne Zha, attempts to rebuild them, but can only use the sacred lotus which housed the orbs originally to build Ne Zha's body. As a result, Ao Bing and Ne Zha must share one body and complete a series of trials in order to receive an elixir that will restore the sacred lotus and finish the creation of Ao Bing's physical self. What results is an epic adventure that contains comedy, action, heartbreak, destruction, and some of the biggest battle sequences I've probably ever seen in my life. I mean it when I say that this movie's final battle scene is on the same level as something like Avengers Endgame or Return of the King. Just imagine those two movies' epic battles combined on steroids, and you get the action in this movie. Much like the first one, this is not really a movie I would recommend to young children. It appears very colorful and friendly, but this movie is actually quite vicious at times in ways that Marvel would probably even say goes too far. This movie builds some serious stakes, and you really get emotionally invested in the journey these characters take. I love the dynamic of our three leads, particularly Ne Zha, Ao Bing, and Tai Yi. They all work really well off each other, and I found myself really getting into their dynamic that they share. You really get a sense that each of these characters go through some really substantial arcs that push them to their limits. planets. I love how three-dimensional each of these characters are. You can tell that they all go through very human experiences despite being born out of metaphysical beings. These aren't just good guys and bad guys, they're complex people with hopes and dreams. They love their family and their people, and they want to do everything they can to protect them. And sometimes they go out of line and do something that damages a relationship, and much of the drama comes in seeing how they'll overcome it. These efforts made to bring peace to this world that, while cannot always be fully realized, are understood and taken into consideration. Much of this movie's themes revolve around coming together to work towards defeating a common enemy, and I love how much time they took to really flesh these people out. It's also easy to see why people love the character of Ne Zha. He has that sort of Goku quality to him where he's a very naive and rebellious figure, but he also has a good heart and always wants to do what's right. He has a lot of energy to him and sometimes will say or do the wrong thing, but his heart is always in the right place regardless. This makes him instantly relatable and likable, especially to those who have big ambitions in the world despite feeling as if they function as outcasts. Now obviously this is a common trope for a main character in any piece of media, but my point here is that it's easy to connect with him and ultimately root for his success. The animation this time around is absolutely stunning. This is a massive upgrade from the first one, which already looks pretty good. But this one has some incredible detail and scope to its visuals that made them constantly engaging to watch. The cartoony slapstick and visceral battle sequences are animated so perfectly, it's hard to look away. The lighting further adds to this, which makes the experience all the more riveting. It's also worth noting that I saw this in 3D, which I thought would be a big addition to this movie. The truth is, you can take it or leave it when it comes to the 3D in this film. It's not the worst conversion I've seen, but I was a little disappointed in it. There are some sequences where I definitely found it enhanced the overall experience, but I wouldn't say it's necessary. It's my understanding that they're adding some IMAX shows this weekend, so that's probably the better way to see it. If you really like 3D though, and want to give this a shot in the format, I'd say go for it, but again, it's probably not necessary. As for flaws, they're very minor, but I'm still not huge on the juvenile humor this movie has. The first movie I think is a bigger offender of this, as there's a lot of fart and pee jokes. There was one joke that was effective in this movie where Ne Zha accidentally pees in a potion the gods give a bunch of the disciples to drink. I think the way they structured the joke and got to the punchline was effective, so I didn't mind if it was a little juvenile. My issue comes when it's just toilet humor for the sake of toilet humor. You get the sense that they put them in there to make the kids laugh, but this movie is otherwise a pretty comfortable PG-13, so it feels extra out of place. Also to clarify, this movie isn't actually PG-13, it's listed as not rated, but if it was assigned a rating, it would be PG-13. That's the point I'm trying to make here. Let me simply say, go see this movie. It's going to be kind of hard to follow, especially if you haven't seen the first one before, but there's so much this movie has to offer that you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you miss out. Just enjoy the vibes and the epic journey, and you're honestly all set. You know, it's funny hearing people talk about how there are no good original movies anymore, and nothing good is coming out. And while this may be true for mainstream American studios, there's plenty of great movies out there if you're willing to look for them. There are so many movies that are made every year from indie filmmakers and other countries, and this is your reminder that you should absolutely be seeking those out. It's always frustrating to hear people complain that maybe a certain year was a quote-unquote bad year for movies, when the reality is you probably haven't seen a lot of the great stuff that's coming out. Like, if you're only going to see Captain America Brave New World or Snow White, then sure, you're gonna have this perception. But opening yourself up to international cinema or indie cinema can make a really big difference in how you see movies. You really begin to appreciate the sectors of the industry, and you slowly begin to realize that there's just so much more out there. I'm sure I missed some great international films from last year solely on the basis of not having heard of it and being unfamiliar with the culture at hand, but oftentimes these movies can be some of the most rewarding experiences you'll have in a theater. So if you love movies and are concerned that cinema is dead or something like that, take solace in knowing that cinema will truly never die so long as there are talented creators around the world that are willing to put their foot forward and make something special. I'm still kind of surprised I haven't seen much fanfare for this yet, especially given the immense box office success it has managed to achieve, but something tells me that word of mouth will quickly spread for this one and eventually reveal itself to be a huge hit here. I would love to see a nomination for Best Animated Feature and or Best International Feature at next year's Oscars, but hopefully the Academy's recency bias doesn't hurt this film's chances given its February release. In conclusion, don't you dare miss this one. I'm giving it a strong 9 out of 10. It could receive the coveted 10 out of 10 upon rewatch, but I feel pretty comfortable about my spot here now. Let me know what you think of this if you do get a chance to see it. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments. Hope you're all doing okay out there, and until next time.